Chapter 4. It was July, and the submarine was looking like, well, whatever a submarine was supposed to look like. Night after night we sweated in the little shed. Then we traipsed home, slept a few hours, got up, and worked the farm. Some nights I was so sleepy Ezra had to poke me awake with whatever tool he was holding. As the turtle grew, so did my excitement. We were developing a mighty weapon of war, and I wanted to brag about it to Josh in the worst way. Even more, I wanted to rub Butch Hyde's face in it. "See," I imagined myself saying, "you're not the only one who knows how to fight." But I don't think a night went by that David didn't remind us how important it was to keep the turtle a secret. "See any Tories?" he'd ask, looking up and down the river banks. In my fatigue I hardly even cared. But maybe that's because it was David's hide on the line and not mine. Tories wouldn't mess with a 14-year-old, would they? Weeks passed, and we didn't see Mr. Pratt or a Tory or even a wandering deer. While David worked on the submarine's instruments, Ezra and I waterproofed the exterior. First, we packed the seams between the two tortoise-shaped halves tight with cork. Then we slathered the surface of the submarine with layers of gooey tar. "Lay it on thick, Nate," Ezra said. "If I'm going underwater in this thing, it'd better be leak-proof." He winked at me. "I've always said there's nothing worse than a leaky submarine." If Ezra was scared about going underwater, he didn't show it. If it had been me going down, I'd have been petrified. Just thinking about being in water made me shiver, even in the hot shed. I thought about poor Ezra bumping around in the deep currents crammed into the little craft. What if it did leak? I slapped on more tar, scouring the surface for spots we might have missed. Ezra would surely drown if the turtle leaked, even a tiny bit. And David wouldn't be able to reach down and yank him up like he did with me 9 years ago. Suddenly, David's head popped up out of the top of the machine. "Gentlemen, I present the depth gauge." David loved showing off his inventions, and since the turtle was a secret, Ezra and I were his only audience. David held up a glass tube. It was about 18 inches long and an inch wide. The upper end was sealed shut. Little lines were painted on the side of the tube, and a piece of cork was wedged inside. "This will be attached to the wall in front of the pilot's seat," David said. "The open end will be attached to a pipe that runs outside the submarine. When the turtle descends, water will enter through the pipe into the gauge. The air pressure in the tube will keep the water from completely filling it. I've calculated that for every 6 feet the turtle descends, the cork will rise 1 inch." "What good is a depth gauge when you can't read it?" Ezra asked, grinning. "Maybe when I hit the bottom of the sound I'll know how deep I am, huh, David?" David grunted and waved Ezra off. "I'll figure something out," he said. "What's the problem?" I asked. "I can't see in the dark, that's the problem," Ezra said. "We're going to launch the turtle at night, and it's going to be pitch black underwater. Without light, I won't be able to see where I'm going, or read the compass, or use this fancy depth thing." "How about a candle?" I asked. "That would give plenty of light." "It would eat up too much air," David said in a muffled voice. He had dropped down into the turtle again. "By my estimate, the turtle only has about 30 minutes of air underwater." He paused. "You'll have to paddle quick, Ezra." Ezra rolled his eyes. "This is starting to sound like a lot of fun. I get to paddle in the dark, hope I don't suffocate, and avoid British cannon. You're going to have to make this up to me, big brother." As we worked, I thought about the problems of darkness and air. If we didn't find answers, the turtle might be sunk before it was launched. Then the name of the most famous man in the colonies popped into my head. Dr. Benjamin Franklin. He had invented a lot of things. He'd even discovered electricity. How hard could it be to illuminate a little 7 by 6 foot underwater boat? For Dr. Franklin, it would be a cinch. "David, what if you wrote to Benjamin Franklin and asked him how to light the turtle?" I asked. "He discovered electricity with a kite. Surely he could come up with something for the submarine." David's head popped up. "Franklin? You've got to be joking. What would he want to do with me? Seems like he's interested in everything, especially inventions, I said, placing my hands affectionately on the turtle. I bet there's nothing like this in the whole world. I think you'd be interested. I doubt it, David said, shaking his head. Dr. Franklin is in Philadelphia with the Continental Congress. He doesn't have time for something small like this. I don't know, Ezra said. I've read that he relaxes by working out complicated math problems. He could probably knock out our little light problem during lunch. Gentlemen, drop it, David said sharply, lowering himself back into the submarine. I will find a solution to the lighting problem in due time. Now, can we get back to work? As we walked home that night, I considered writing to Benjamin Franklin myself. What would a letter from a 14-year-old boy mean to the most famous man in America? Probably nothing. He likely gets lots of letters from important people. But how many letters did he get about submarines? The more I thought about it, the more the idea of writing Dr. Franklin made sense. But deep down a doubt lingered. I had promised David I wouldn't tell anyone about the turtle. But couldn't Dr. Franklin be an exception? After all, he was one of the leaders of the revolution, and if anyone was a patriot, he was. The next day I snuck out to the barn with a pen and ink and paper. Dear Dr. Franklin, my cousin David Bushnell in Saybrook, Connecticut, is an inventor like you. He has invented a water machine to fight the British. It travels underwater and can attach gunpowder bombs to ships. The bombs actually explode underwater. He knows they work because he tried them out at Yale. We have a problem I thought you could help us with. It's dark underwater and we need light so we can see the depth gauge and compass. A candle won't work because it would burn up all the air. Do you have any ideas? Your obedient servant, Nathan Wade, Saybrook, Connecticut. The next day I rode into Saybrook on the wagon with David and Uncle Elias. Letter for your father? Uncle Elias asked, nodding toward the envelope in my hand. Yes, I lied, just telling him how the crops are doing. So how are they doing? Uncle Elias asked mischievously. Good enough, I guess. The corn is up to my knees. Once we were in town, Uncle Elias and David went into Bowers General Store to get some supplies, and I went down the street to the Rising Sun Tavern. I couldn't believe that I, lowly Nathan Wade, was mailing a letter to the great patriot Benjamin Franklin. As I neared the tavern, though, my doubts began gnawing at me. What if Mr. Pratt intercepted the letter? I didn't trust him as far as I could spit. Maybe his assistant, Mr. Willard, would be there instead. Mild as a mug of milk, Mr. Willard would forget whom the letter was addressed to 5 minutes after reading it. Well, here goes, I thought, and stepped into the gloom of the tavern. Good day, Nathan. Whew, it was Mr. Willard. Good day, Mr. Willard. Need to mail that? He asked, nodding at the letter in my hand. Yes, sir. He took the letter from my hand and put it in a bag without even looking at it. Sir, when do you think the letter will mail? I asked. Well, there's a post-rider down the street. He'll be down here to get our mail unless he's in a hurry with big news. A post-rider? I exclaimed. I ran out to the street, leaving the letter and Mr. Willard behind. Uncle Elias and David were hurrying toward a crowd gathered at the wharf. I ran to catch up with them. Riders rode fast horses up and down the post road, bringing news to the towns along the way. The road stretched from Boston down to New London, then west along the coast through Saybrook to New Haven, and then on to New York City. I saw Josh's short, tubby body running to meet us. Independence! He yelled. The Continental Congress signed a Declaration of Independence on July 4th. The colonies are free. David cracked a big grin and leaned in close to my ear. It's almost time for the turtle to fulfill its mission, he whispered. As the crowd cheered, the post-rider galloped off to take the wonderful news to New Haven. When the hard-charging horse neared the rising sun, Mr. Pratt leapt out into the street. He was waving an envelope. The startled rider yanked back hard on the reins. He shouted at Mr. Pratt, who kept waving the envelope. I was too far away to hear what was said, but the writer finally snatched the envelope from Mr. Pratt's hand and thundered down the road. My stomach started swirling. Dang, Mr. Pratt was there after all. What letter was so important for him to almost tackle the post-rider? I couldn't help but worry that it was my letter to Dr. Franklin. While Uncle Elias and David hustled home in the wagon to tell Ezra and Aunt Sarah, I walked Josh home. "See you, Nate," he said, walking to his front door. "Get some sleep, all right? You look terrible. What, is David keeping you up all night inventing stuff?" "Yeah, something like that," I mumbled. As soon as Josh closed the door, my fears about the letter came barreling back. What if Mr. Pratt had read it? Why had I written the letter in the first place? David would have figured out the lighting problem by himself. I stood still, the pieces falling together in my mind. It had been Mr. Pratt I'd seen that night on the river. It was dark, sure, but I'd recognized that ugly old slouch shape anywhere. Why hadn't I believed myself? So he was a Tory. He'd almost certainly read my letter to Dr. Franklin. Then he'd written a note to the British telling them about the turtle. Finally, he forced the post-rider to take the letter. Sheesh, this was bad. We were exposed. They would hang David and Ezra. They would sabotage the turtle. And they would tar and feather me? How long before the letter got to the British? A few days? A few weeks? Anger boiled up inside me. That old goat Pratt. I had to warn David. As I started to run, a leg shot out from the side of the Pratt's house. I sprawled head first, my jaw banging against the hard-packed dirt street. Pain racked my head and I tasted blood. "What's your hurry, Yellow Belly?" Butch Hyde's boot was on the back of my head, grinding my face into the dirt. "You running home to your chicken cousin who ain't got the guts to fight redcoats?" Suddenly from above I heard a voice, a female voice. "Butch, you leave him alone." Startled, Butch lifted his boot off my head. I spat bloody saliva and looked up. A window on the second floor framed long red hair and a pretty, angry face. Great, I thought. Rachel was finally looking down from her window at me, and I was getting whipped. "Butch, you coward!" she yelled. "Oh, shut up, Pratt," Butch snapped. "Wade is bigger than me, and you know it. He's too scared to fight." "Then why do you pick on him? What are you scared of?" "You're one to talk. How about you and your whole turncoat family? Your father's a Tory and everyone knows it." Rachel's eyes flamed with fury, and I wondered, tears? "He is not, you ugly son of an ironmonger," she yelled, now definitely crying. Then I did something I couldn't believe. I flipped onto my back and whipped my legs as hard as I could at Butch's legs. He dropped like a cornstalk cut by a sharp scythe. Butch landed heavily next to me, his face barely 6 inches from mine. For a second we just sort of looked at each other in disbelief. Him because I'd leveled him, me because, well, I'd actually leveled him. Out of the corner of my eye I saw his fist heading for my head. In an instant I was on my feet, running for the woods behind the village. "You're just like Pratt, a yellow-bellow Tory," Butch yelled. I stopped dead in my tracks and slowly turned around. Tory, I thought angrily. Tory? I work every night until 3 o'clock, building a weapon of war for the Continental Army, and he calls me a Tory. I wanted to scream. "I'm building a submarine, you—" What did Rachel say? "Ugly son of an ironmonger idiot." But just as the retort rose in my throat, I remembered David's words. It just takes one Tory spy to find out and we'll be ruined. Butch was no Tory, but I knew he'd flap his lip and tell everyone in town about the turtle. I turned and dashed into the woods. When I was sure Butch wasn't pursuing, I slowed to a walk. My tongue was cut, and drying blood crusted on my chin. Dusk was gathering. I sat in a little clearing and listened to the growing racket of the cicadas. Little pricks of light, fireflies, began flickering around the clearing. Too bad we couldn't bottle some of them to light the submarine, I thought. Once I'd mashed up a bunch of them and tried to light the barn, but the faint yellow glow had faded in a few seconds. I thought about this for a minute, and then an idea hit me. Foxfire! Why hadn't we thought of it before? Foxfire could light the submarine. I got up and pushed into the woods. I soon saw what I was looking for, a faint glow on the ground. Hacking through undergrowth, I reached a rotting log. Soft flecks of light speckled the crumbling wood. With my knife I scraped off some of the luminous, mossy stuff. We could attach pieces of foxfire on the depth gauge and compass. I was sure it would work in the submarine, if the Tories hadn't sunk it yet. The memory of my foolish letter to Benjamin Franklin flooded back. If only I'd waited before sending the letter, I thought. The answer had been right in front of me. David was going to kill me, if the Tories didn't kill him first.